So we have a really interesting report that is coming out here. Apparently, the Las Vegas Raiders and their superstar left tackle, Kolton Miller, are apparently not close to a brand new contract. And I want to talk about why I'm a little concerned about this. I want to talk about why I think for the Raiders, Kolton Miller has to be a top priority. And if you're John Spytek, you have to get this done. You have to take care of Kolton Miller because you cannot go into this season with uncertainty on the offensive line, specifically at the tackle position. You guys know how I feel about offensive linemen. I truly do think if you have a great offensive line, you'll have success, and even the best quarterback will struggle without a great offensive line. We've seen Patrick Mahomes now. So over the last, 7-8 years, he struggled anytime he's not had a good offensive line. Anytime Patrick Mahomes has lost in the Super Bowl, it's basically because his offensive line could not handle the guys on the other side, the defensive linemen. We saw it against the Eagles, and a couple years back, we saw it against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, when I look at the Raiders right now, I look at a team that we're not even sure if we have two starting caliber tackles right now. Right? We don't know if outside of Kolton Miller, we have a guy, ready to go for that right tackle position. Of course, DJ Glaze has upside, he has potential, but that's not guaranteed. Right, we'll find out in his second year if DJ Glaze is actually a good offensive tackle and if he's essentially going to be the long-term solution for the Raiders. I want to talk about this report here a little bit. So this came out by Vincent Bonsignore, who is a Las Vegas Raiders insider. He basically put this out there. He quoted what Kolton Miller had to say. Kolton Miller said, "I want to be a Raider for life. I love it here. I don't want to go anywhere else." However, Vincent Bonsignore reported, citing sources, that the two sides are currently not close on a new deal. To me, this is a massive report, and I think there was another beat reporter that also said the same exact thing. Essentially, the two sides are not close to a contract. I forget who it was that also reported this, but we're hearing two Raiders reporter with one an actual insider, Vincent Bonsignore, who's basically saying that the two sides aren't close. And again, when I think about the Raiders and I think about where this team is, Geno Smith can be a really, really, really good quarterback. Ashton Jeanty could be one of the most explosive running backs in the NFL. Brock Bowers could go for 1,500 yards. That's how great he is. But, your offensive line is essentially going to be a big part of that. And right now, the Raiders, at left tackle have that uncertainty. Now, some people also don't think Kolton Miller will actually play if he doesn't have a new contract. And I kind of agree with that. The fact that Kolton Miller has already held out once, and again, I know it was technically he didn't have to be there, right? It wasn't mandatory, but the fact that we were at a point where Kolton Miller did decide not to show up, and then he even went out there where his agent put that report out, right? I think they used Jeremy Fowler of ESPN. They essentially put the report out that he wants a new contract, that he wasn't going to be with the Raiders during the offseason. Obviously, he ended up showing up. He probably spoke to Spytek or potentially some of the other guys inside the building, right? Some of the front office guys. There's a good chance Kolton Miller was told that, hey, if you show up, we'll eventually get you that contract. But the fact that they're not close is a concern to me. And I'm pretty confident if he's already held out once, although, again, it wasn't mandatory. Although he's held out once already, I think there's a chance when that time comes around again, rather that's training camp, preseason, the regular season's approaching, there's a chance Kolton Miller isn't actually going to show up. And I think there's a real chance he will not play for the Raiders unless he has that extension. We've seen this happen more and more, as we kind of go forward. Right, Maxx Crosby, before he got his contract, if you guys remember, just a couple months back, he hinted it multiple times that he's not sure if he's going to be with the Raiders. And obviously, he also mentioned it multiple times that he needed a new contract. Now, he was obviously taken care of pretty quickly here by the Raiders. Kolton Miller has to be taken care of. Just kind of looking at the offensive line as a whole, there's so much potential and upside in that offensive line unit. When I think about Jackson Powers-Johnson, to me, Powers-Johnson has 3 years left on his rookie contract. I think he's going to be one of the best centers in the NFL. And then you look at the right tackle position. You have, some mixture, some combination of DJ Glaze or Charles Grant. I think one of those two guys will eventually hold down that right tackle position and be solid. I think both guys have a ton of upside. At the guard positions, you have guys that are, I think, good guards as well, right? Dylan Parham still has, he still has potential, but even now he's a pretty good guard. I think he's a capable guard. And then you have a guy in Caleb Rogers who you've invested a third-round pick in, right? You're young. You have first year, second year, third year guys basically across the offensive line. And then, of course, at the left tackle position, you have Kolton Miller, who is probably a top 10 tackle in the NFL. To me, the Raiders' offensive line has the potential to be a top 10 unit this year. But again, Kolton Miller's obviously a big part of it. And I think the Raiders get so much worse. If you go from Kolton Miller to Charles Grant at left tackle, I think it's a huge, huge, huge decline. I don't think Charles Grant's ready at this point to be a starting tackle in the NFL. Even as the Raiders brought him in, he was always kind of a developmental tackle. I think he's raw. He has to get used to the game speed. He's not ready to be a day one starter. And I think for the Raiders, if you don't lock in Kolton Miller and you decide to go forward with Charles Grant or maybe even Thayer Munford at that point, I think the Raiders are going to struggle on the offensive line. And then to take it a step further, if DJ Glaze ends up not being a good tackle and you get rid of Kolton Miller, it's just going to be really, really bad all around. And then lastly, offensive tackles actually get better with age. It's the one position where you get a lot better essentially getting older, right? Some people might say, hey, you look at a tackle, right? Lane Johnson as an example. There's a real chance Lane Johnson had his best year this past season. I think he's like 34, 35 years old. Trent Williams, although he's not as good anymore, was still really, really, really good at like 34 years old just a year or two ago. Offensive tackles can last a really long time. And I think with Kolton Miller, he's going to last a really, really, really long time. The guy, when he came in was on the skinnier side, but he was super athletic. And he's at the point where his body's like fully developed, but he still has that athleticism. He still has that flexibility. I think Kolton Miller plays 5 years still easily, right? He's going to turn 30 years old here. To me, the Raiders got to 100% lock this guy in. It's not going to cost you more than like $18 to $20 million anyways. And if you sign him to, let's say, a 3-year extension, you have him for 4 more years. So we'll see what ends up happening as we kind of go forward. But the fact that the two sides are not close does kind of concern me. But again, we'll see what ends up happening as we just kind of continue to go forward. I do hope John Spytek gets this figured out. There's a couple other reports that I want to talk about. ESPN does this ranking that they do pretty much every single year. NFL executives and scouts kind of pick their favorite 2025 offseason moves. And the move that the Raiders made in which they swapped out Geno Smith, or I should say the move that the Seahawks made where they swapped out Geno Smith, they got Sam Darnold, was actually given a win for both sides. And I kind of want to talk about some of what was said in this report. So Seattle obviously flipped Geno Smith for Sam Darnold, Jalen Monroe. They got cash out of it. And of course, the Las Vegas Raiders get its quarterback future. And everyone wins, according to these NFL executives. I'm going to read to you guys exactly what the executive said about the Raiders specifically. The executive basically said that Geno Smith gives the Las Vegas Raiders credibility at that position. And Pete Carroll and Geno seem to have good chemistry together, so it's a good way for both of them to start, an NFL executive said. I figure they will look to draft the quarterback in the next few years, but for now, they haven't answered. And they also kind of talked about how for the Seahawks, this is a win-win as well. Basically, the Seahawks end up getting a little bit younger at the quarterback position, but they end up basically paying Darnold exactly what Geno Smith gets. So it's basically the same exact contract. They just get a little bit younger. And, I love the fact that the Raiders did what they did this offseason. If you guys go back the last 6-7 years, there's always, had been reports like the Raiders are tied to Tom Brady, for example, back in 2019, 2020. The Raiders are tied to Tom Brady. They're tied to Aaron Rodgers. They're tied to, quarterback X, Y, and Z. And it's always just, been certain quarterbacks that the Raiders are tied to, but the Raiders never pulled the trigger. They always kind of just settled at the quarterback position. Right? You look at Derek Carr in his final 2-3 years with the Raiders. He wasn't that good. They kind of just stuck it out with him. They got rid of him. They kind of settled with Jimmy Garoppolo and Aiden O'Connell, and then the next year it's like a mixture of AOC in his second year, and Gardner Minshew, and they never really went all in at that quarterback position, and this was the first year they kind of did that. And they didn't go all in like the way the Browns went all in on Deshaun Watson, right? The Browns guaranteed Deshaun Watson a 6-year contract, and they're stuck with him now, even for the next 2 to 3 years. They can't move off of Deshaun Watson. That's not what the Raiders did. Right, the Raiders essentially went in and said, we're going to go out there and get Geno Smith. We're going to trade a 3rd-round pick for Geno Smith, which I think was pick 92. So the Raiders give up a 3rd-round pick 92. And then more than that, right, giving up this pick, The Raiders also didn't give Geno Smith a lot of money, right? So not only was it a third round pick, but it wasn't a ton of money. To me, that's just smart all around, right? You get a veteran quarterback who could basically put you like in win now mode, right? If you build a roster that could potentially hold it together and can potentially carry Geno a little bit. Geno can also make things happen, right? He's a playmaker. The Raiders are kind of in win now mode. They're going to be a Super Bowl contender no matter what anybody says. You know, they're looking to win a Super Bowl. More than that, they didn't, lock themselves in where in 3 years they're going to be like on the wrong side of this trade, right? They're going to have to owe Geno all this dead cap or whatever it is. The Raiders made a very, very, very smart move. And this executive is basically saying that, right? He's basically saying the Raiders made the smart move. They made the move that ultimately puts them in position to win. And they can still draft the quarterback in a couple of years, which obviously also makes sense, right? I love what John Spytek has done for the Raiders up to this point. I didn't agree early on with the idea of like, hey, drafting a running back with the 6th overall pick. I didn't agree with the idea. But I do also understand that sometimes you need to just get better playmakers and just be better at scoring points. It's the very basics of NFL, right? Team building. Just getting better in scoring points is something the Raiders kind of lacked last year. And coming into this year, now you have, just think about the last 2 years. You now have Brock Bowers. You now have Ashton Jeanty. You have Trey Tucker and Dante Thornton, Jack Bech, right? These are guys you didn't have just 2 years ago. Michael Mayer. Some people are like, hey, they might trade him. Instead, the Raiders said, we're going to actually stick with this guy, and we're going to get him the football, right? We're going to make this guy make some plays for us, and he's looking really good in camp as well. What the Raiders have done over the past 2 years is they've essentially, they've essentially gotten to the point where they're actually potentially explosive as hell on the offensive side, right? I really, really like what the Raiders did. And it's not just John Spytek. You got to give Tom Telesco credit as well. His 2 picks his first 2 picks specifically, incredible picks, right? We'll see how the rest of them pan out. But the first 2, you got 2 superstar players. And then coming into this year, John Spytek hit as well with the 6th overall pick. I don't know about anybody else, but at least with Ashton Jeanty, I'm confident he's going to be a really, really, really good football player. And, again, to me, the Raiders are just getting better. They're getting better. They're getting better. They're going to compete for a Super Bowl, right? Like, we're going to get to the point in a year or two where, the expectation is we are going to make, like, we're not going to think, like, can we make the playoffs? It's like we are going to make the playoffs, right? And I'm just really, really excited. And I'm glad that other people are also kind of noticing what the Raiders are doing. And then finally, I want to just wrap this up. There's a report that I had heard specifically talking to the guy that I speak to. And I kind of searched around and, see if anybody else kind of mentioned it. I haven't actually seen anyone else mention it, but it is a report that this guy told me. It's actually related to some of the guys that are being given certain roles right now. So the Raiders have some young linebackers, right? We have Amari Gaynor. We have Cody Eichenberg. We have, Cody Linderberg, Tommy Eichenberg, right? We have 3 young linebackers, first, second year guys. And I wanted to ask him which guys he thinks has essentially the lead on the position right now, right? We know there's 3 veteran linebackers that we have. We have Pratt, we have Devin White, and then of course we have Landon Roberts. But who's like that number 4 guy right now? Who's the guy that you could see potentially actually taking snaps? And, I would have guessed it would have been Amari Gaynor, but it's actually not Amari Gaynor. According to this guy, he thinks it's going to be Cody Linderberg, the 7th round linebacker that the Raiders just drafted. Now, of course, we do have to recognize, right? Pete Carroll just came in. It's his first draft pick. Pete Carroll may have had some influence in this guy, and he may want this guy to potentially step up and have that opportunity to be like that number 4 linebacker for the Raiders, right? The first guy minus the veterans. That doesn't mean he'll be the 4th guy coming in, but he could easily be the 2nd linebacker for the Raiders or the 3rd linebacker out there, right? He may be utilized in certain packages. But right now, from what I'm hearing, Cody Lindenberg is the green dot guy for the Raiders. He's the one guy. Landon Roberts is the guy with the 1st team unit. Cody Lindenberg is the guy with the 2nd team unit. The Raiders are putting pressure on this guy that, hey, if anything happens to Roberts, we're relying on you to be that next man up. To me, that tells me this guy is the guy that could also get out there and potentially have, meaningful snaps being played. It's not Tommy Eichenberg. It's not Amari Gainer. Those guys are not given that green dot. It's the 7th round pick, right? It's Cody Linderberg, the guy that's getting those reps. And again, to me, that's just a very, very interesting strategy going into this season because, not that he's a bad football player, right? I think his tape in college is pretty good. But it's interesting because I thought Amari Gainer looked really, really, really good last year. And he did it in preseason, right? Which the competition in preseason is better than if you're playing at Minnesota, for example. So to me, it's just interesting that the Raiders are not actually utilizing Gainer as a potential green dot guy, right? Instead, they're going to utilize Eichenberg, and they're kind of putting him in that role, which also tells me that, Roberts, who's on a short-term contract, could easily be replaced by Linderberg for the future, right? It means the Raiders might actually have more hope in him than some of the other guys. It's an interesting report, right? But I am surprised. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I am kind of surprised that it's not Amari Gainer. That's the number one guy, the number one among the younger guys for the Raiders. But I guess I'm not surprised because at the end of the day, you would think Pete Carroll is gonna definitely favor his guys that he's drafting, right? They're revamping the defense. They want to get certain guys that can do certain things, and I guess it makes sense in that instance. But we should also note there will be multiple linebackers playing multiple roles, right? So, for example, if Jermaine Pratt, for example, is playing on the line of scrimmage in base defenses, the Raiders might utilize Amari Gainer for that in terms of the second team unit, right? So if Pratt goes down, then maybe it's Amari Gainer that steps in over a guy like Cody Linderberg, right? So it'll be interesting with the roles as we kind of go forward, but it does seem like right now Cody Linderberg is the guy that's kind of getting that jump on some of the other guys. But we'll see what ends up happening. Training camp, a couple weeks away. Let me know what you guys think, man. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. How do you guys feel about Kolton Miller's contract situation? How do you guys feel about the Geno Smith trade, generally speaking? And then what are your thoughts on Cody Linderberg getting the actual snaps for the Raiders? Let me know in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.